What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and this may very well be the greatest Doctor Doom story that's ever been told in Marvel Comics. So, we are at the finale of One World Under Doom, and this picks up, of course, from issue number 8, where Doom launched an attack against the entirety of the superhero community and killed his niece, Valeria Richards, by accident. And so what this does is it opens up with him actually reflecting back on the history between the two of them. And one of the things to know is that where it talks about this idea that Valeria always had his heart, the truth about Valeria's significance to Doctor Doom is a little bit less about the character of Valeria Richards and more about the character of Valeria as she existed in Latveria. And for those of you guys who don't know that history, in Marvel Superheroes number 20, back in 1969, Larry Lieber and Roy Thomas introduced Valeria as this girl that we had never heard of before up until that point in time. And it turned out that Victor Von Doom was actually in love before he left Latveria. Ultimately, he leaves the whole thing behind and leaves Valeria behind, and then effectively starts himself on this path of becoming a dictator or becoming a ruler, right? This Doctor Doom as we know him now. And so in that whole story where he comes into contact with Diablo, who had kidnapped the mysterious girl who's revealed to actually be Valeria, she kind of beckons him again, right? Like, leave all of that behind and stay with me. And Doom doesn't, right? Doom actually stays silent, and instead he chooses the path that he's on, and he loses Valeria forever. And so because Valeria kind of always had his heart in some capacity, when the time comes that Valeria Richards is born, as complicated as that process may have been, because of the significance of her, Doctor Doom ensures that Susan can give birth to a happy, healthy baby, and then in turn takes her on as his goddaughter. So among everybody out there within the Marvel Universe, Valeria Richards is really the only person that Doctor Doom really and truly cares about outside of himself and his people in Latveria. And so that's why it says, when she's born, I place you under my royal protection, little Valeria. If anyone is ever foolish enough to strike at you, they will deal with me. And in the next panel, right, here in Latveria Richards, Doom demands that children always get a good night's sleep, right? As she gets older, he says, finish up here, child, right? When she's working on her stuff. And she's like, can we have ice cream later? And Doom just says, Doom will consider your request. It was always one of these things where he would just dote on her and he would spoil her, that no matter what happened, he really and genuinely, truly loved her. And in fact, he talks about this. He says, this is a love story. It's about a great king who never allowed anyone to touch his heart, and his goddaughter, who claimed it so easily, so gracefully, that he never once noticed it happening. The great king protected his goddaughter. He cared for her and taught her things her parents could not. Across the entire cosmos, she was the only one who was, to him, special. And across the entire cosmos, he was the only one who was, to her, special too. And so that's where it picks up with her death. And it says, and when his goddaughter died, the great king's heart, which he had never allowed anyone to touch, broke forever. And so at that point, you kind of pick up in what's essentially the afterlife. Now, we're not explicitly told what this location is. We can largely presume it's like the Far Shore. For those of you guys who are not aware of the Far Shore, it used to be that it was the furthest place that you could go before you got to the House of Ideas, where the One Above All resides. That's not so much the case anymore, right? Al Ewing has kind of shifted that around, and now the White Hot Room is the furthest place that you go. But the Far Shore still kind of maintains this ideology of essentially being the gateway to the afterlife, essentially a way station before you move to the place beyond. And so within this place, Doctor Doom is actually talking to the soul of Valeria, right? And she just says, like, I'm too old for fairy tales. And Doom says, I know, but stories have power, and at present, stories, Valeria, are the only thing holding your body and soul together. And so she just says, okay, I see, right? What happened next? And so he says, the great king did all that he could, but he could not save her. He could not change the past. He says, in fact, he could not manage anything. Her body was rotting and her soul was gone. And it's important to know, Doom is legitimately brokenhearted here, right? Like, Doom does not permit this, little one. Do you hear me? Doom does not per minute. Like, he's not okay with her being dead. And it's kind of crushing because in that moment he says, and so the great king voyaged to places mortals were never meant to go. He reached the home and refuge of the gods who called themselves the Vishanti. They had extraordinary powers over life and death. They could choose if they wanted to fix a mistake. But these beings, tremendous and powerful, spoke only of duty and of consequences. They refused to hear what the king was saying, and so the great king forced them to listen. Now, the significance of the Vishanti is that whenever you're talking about a Sorcerer Supreme, Jericho Drum, Brother Voodoo, Doctor Strange, Doctor Doom, that most of their power, like 80% of their power, comes from the Vishanti. They are that powerful. Now, they're not all powerful, right? They're not like the most powerful beings in existence in Marvel, but they are immensely powerful. So much so that when Doctor Strange refused to fight on their behalf, they stripped him of their power, and he was a fraction of as powerful as he used to be. That's actually pre-retcon Doctor Strange. Once he came back, he wasn't nearly as powerful as he was before. But again, the Vishanti are incredibly capable in their own right. But in the face of the fact that they refuse to listen to anything Doom says, he lashes out. He says the king had used all his earthly magic, but here among the Vishanti, there were different rules, different magics. Here, there was magic powered by emotion, and the great king had an infinite supply of that. And that's when he freaks, right? You will heed the words of Doom. He will not be ignored because the life of Valeria rests on his shoulders. It's desperation, right? It is desperation here. Yet still, the Vishanti will not hear him. And so he says, the Vishanti would not listen, nor heed, nor obey. So the great king sought better gods, stronger gods. He traveled through yawning voids, through rooms white hot, until, on a far and distant shore, the great king finally arrived before the strongest god there was. And for the first time in his life, the great king bargained. So at this point, now we're given context. Meeting with the living tribunal in the far shore, seemingly that's not where Doom and Valeria are at. Maybe they are, who knows? But the cool thing about it is that at this point, the living tribunal asks, who dares disturb us? Who dares disturb the living tribunal? And it's kind of cool to see the tribunal is sort of going back to the status quo. And it seems like Ryan North is on some level kind of ignoring what it was that Jonathan Hickman had done with the tribunal and Oblivion regarding their roles within the Marvel multiverse. It's not to say that what Hickman did during God sucked. I thought it was kind of cool. But historically, the tribunal has always been second to the one above all. That's the way it always was. He was immensely powerful. So it meant something when you approached the tribunal and had a conversation with it. And Doom says, I dare, right? This is Valeria Richards, and she has died, and I require it to be otherwise. I will offer you anything you desire. And the tribunal just simply says, bargains carry terrible costs, but one cannot bargain without anything to offer. And you, Doom, have nothing. And that's the interesting thing here, because this is very reminiscent of Doom War, and I'll talk about why here in a second, because Doom approaches the tribunal and he says, no, if one seeks justice, tribunal, then one always has something to offer, a more just universe. And the tribunal responds, perhaps, Victor, but you do not seek justice. You seek assuagement of guilt and not to suffer. And that's where Doom says, yes, I desire all those things as all who live do. But today, I seek more. On this occasion, tribunal, Doom will hide nothing from you. Just this once, Doom demands to be fully seen. And that's kind of the cool thing, because in turn it says, and so the tribunal, who could destroy the great king with less than a thought, looked into his soul. In that devastating torrent, the tribunal saw what they expected to see, the rage, the guilt, the regret, and the wild ambition wildly achieved. But they also saw something never seen in the great king before. The living tribunal saw love. They saw that the king had truly come not for himself, but for his goddaughter. To love someone is to put their well-being above your own. And the tribunal knew that to see such a thing in such a thing was unexpected and meritorious. Now, here's why I say this is very reminiscent of Doom War. For those of you guys who never read that story, and it's one of the greatest Doctor Doom stories ever written, one of the greatest Doctor Doom and Black Panther stories ever written, that Doom War initially focused on the idea of a coup d'etat within the nation of Wakanda, which is to say a nationalist uprising, that there were individuals within the country who had turned against T'Challa and his Queen Storm along with the rest of the royal family because they believed that they had failed the true nature of Wakanda, isolation, right, that kind of thing. And so they basically ran the royal family out. During that time, T'Challa is injured, he passes the mantle to his sister Shuri, and that's how Shuri becomes a Black Panther in Marvel Comics. What you end up learning is the entire nationalist uprising was orchestrated by Doctor Doom, and it was designed to create a distraction over there so nobody would look at what was happening over here. And what was happening over here? Doctor Doom was sneaking into Wakanda and stealing the vibranium, but the final test that he had to undertake before he could attain all of Wakanda's vibranium stores, which would amplify his magical energy, is he had to humble himself before the Panther goddess Bast. And Bast, being as powerful as she is, could have killed Doom. And so Doom had to truly show Bast what was in his heart. And what Doom revealed here is that he had looked into countless futures of Earth, and in every future he had seen war, disease, famine, death, destruction, right? Any number of circumstances that would lead to the ruin of all. But the only way in which the world would continue on into a glorious future is if it was under the control of Doctor Doom. And it wasn't a ruse. It wasn't any kind of a trick, right? He truly loved humanity in such a way that he genuinely believed only he was capable of saving it. And Bast, seeing the truth in Doctor Doom's heart, allowed him to attain the vibranium. That's the reason why at the end of Doom War, Doctor Doom basically has to destroy the magical properties of vibranium, rendering them into basically inert chunks of rock, right? Which is why vibranium for a time in Marvel just didn't really have any value at all if you're familiar with that little bit of history in the Black Panther and Wakanda mythos from Marvel Comics. But this is almost identical to that, right? It's almost the exact same thing. And so it's a really cool concept because what it shows is that Doctor Doom is truly capable of loving people other than himself. It just takes an extreme situation for him to recognize it. And so at that point, talking to the essence of Valeria, he says, and thus, just this once, the living tribunal granted the great king his desire. You are going to live, Valeria. You are going to live. And Valeria just tells him, no, uncle, you told me everything has a cost. And the tribunal must have extracted some terrible cost. And Doom just cuts her off, right? And he says, there is a cost. Of course there is. And I will pay it. And Valeria just kind of says, you've lost the mantle of Sorcerer Supreme. I can see that, but there's got to be more. Like, please, Uncle Doom, tell me what this costs. And Doom doesn't answer her. And he just says, your soul will go back where it belongs and your body will be restored. What it costs is irrelevant. You will return to Latveria, and Doom, only Doom, will deal with the consequences. And so at that point, he sends her back, and she just shows back up, right? This quite literally reappears here. And of course, the entirety of her family is ecstatic on what's going on here, on the fact that Valeria has literally been saved. And they're kind of flabbergasted over the fact that it's happened, right? They even ask the question, right? Like, how is this possible? And Valeria just says, right, he did what he promised he would do at the start of all of this. Like, he quite literally saved my life. And so at that point, you end up switching over to these various broadcasts that are kind of going on around the world. In the United States, in the midst of a reporter talking, we hear him say, the United States continues to feel the effects of Doom's shocking disappearance and apparent abdication of his global throne. Claiming victory, the world's heroes quickly move to presumably consolidate power. That in Australia, right, a reporter says, recorded message, Doom released a cure for vampirism, but regretted still greater miracles could only be achieved if he were again restored to power. That of course, J. Jonah Jameson, like a Twitter user, has an opinion about everything, even if nobody asked for it, just says borders have been closed as world leaders claiming they were influenced by some form of Doom mind control try to unwind his influence. The Avengers, of course, have been silent as to whether this was actually, and then of course he gets cut off, so you never really find out what he says. But that's when you kind of get this aftermath from the Emperor Doom storyline. For those of you guys who are not familiar with that, which is also a phenomenal Doom story, it's very different from this. Dr. Doom took control of the world by basically amplifying the powers of the Purple Man, Zebediah Killgrave, and placing everyone under his influence. Of course, at the end of the story, Dr. Doom is quote-unquote defeated, for lack of a better word, but it's really more that he just gives up the throne. But on the flight back, back, the world is kind of descending back into madness and chaos, right? It's this idea that like border skirmishes are starting back up, right? Old rivalries are kicking back in again. And Hawkeye kind of asked the question, like, is the world really better off now that Doctor Doom is not in control? Yes, he was controlling everybody using the powers of the Purple Man, but for a time, Earth knew peace. And Captain America's just kind of like, something, freedom. And it's a really interesting way to end the story because yes, Doctor Doom was a dictator, but you can make a credible argument that humanity couldn't and even refused to get it together. So Doctor Doom made them. And if left to their own devices, humanity will destroy itself, wage war against itself because people are primitive and they just don't know any better. And so that's when you start going into these different arguments that people are making. And something that's really interesting here, right, not to sound cynical or anything, is that it's one of these circumstances where no one has the facts, but they've convinced themselves that they do. And so this one guy says that these heroes robbed the world of Doom. That's all. They couldn't stand that he was actually getting things done. They rejected the gift of Doom, but they had no right to do that for us. They had absolutely no right. They can attack the man, but his ideas are out there and they're not going anywhere. And he might be the only person who's actually not treating a personal opinion as absolute fact, because another person says, United Latveria, the heroes saved us from that preening fool. We're free again, and we never needed Doom to tell us what to do. And I'll say this much, if any Latverian is stupid enough to cross my path, which of course she's not going to actually do anything, there's another guy who says, sorry, I don't really follow politics. But then you get into this red-haired woman, right, where she says, Doom spun giving up the world as a noble act, when really it was just looking out for himself. Acting all, you can't fire me, I quit. He lost. Get over it. And this other guy says, the heroes didn't beat him. Doom gave up his world to save a single soul, his goddaughter. He's a real hero, the best of us, and he will come back to save us, and screw anybody who says otherwise. Which you guys understand why this guy's statement probably matters the most, because he's the only guy who actually knows what happened. Everybody else is just taking their opinion and just assuming that it's true. And so at that point, you switch over to the Fantastic Four, specifically to Reed Richards. And this is one of the dopest conversations in the comic, because at that point, when Doctor Doom reappears, right, a glowing green light behind Reed knows who it is. And so Reed's just like, freedom is returning to the world you know. Old democracies are being restored. But Doom responds and he says, and old dictatorships too, and old borders, old inequality, old suffering, old lies, and old hate. And he just says, an interesting concept of freedom that you have, Richards. And Reed just says, we're in a worse place than we were before you. Coups, instabilities, expulsions, and the gulf between those who still support you and those who don't is being filled with violence and terrorism. The way you left our world, Victor, it has scars. And he says, you should know that Latveria, without you, presumably is falling apart. We don't necessarily know if that is true, but there's a really good instance in Marvel Comics in Fantastic Four number 200 when Doctor Doom was effectively defeated and for a time was believed to be dead. He was actually in a comatose state, but Latveria fell into the hands of a rebel faction. And when that happened, there were all these promises about the idea that, democracy would come and they would have votes, so on and so forth. But the entire country fell into a state of disarray. So much so that by the time Doom returned in Fantastic Four Annual number 15, he was incensed. He was pissed off about the fact that those running his country could not run it effectively. They had no clue what they were doing, and that the country had fallen into a state of disrepair, and the leader had just literally become tyrannical. And so Dr. Doom just kind of cuts Reed off, and he asks the question, tell me, are you enjoying it, the fruits of your labor? And Reed doesn't actually seem like he does. And he just says, I will say this, there was perhaps never another man more gifted and better suited to be a great and benevolent leader, if he chose to be, than Victor Von Doom. But instead of helping people, you helped yourself. You made fascism appealing, even attractive. You sold it to good people as a reasonable option, and it destroyed all it touched, including you, Victor. You sacrificed your own citizens to prop up a hollow promise of peace and prosperity. And when you were revealed, you demanded still more sacrifice, more suffering, just to keep yourself in power. And you have left our world a far worse place than you found it. Now, the philosophical nature of this discussion is incredible, and it is amazing, because while Reed Richards is right about the idea of Dr. Doom feeding on the life energy of his own people to keep himself in power and to basically heal and fix the rest of the world, there's classic utilitarianism. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. I would also say this is a perfect example that illustrates how superheroes are sometimes the problem, because it's not so much what Reed Richards says, it's what he doesn't say. Because at no point in this great big huge monologue does he ever say, and the people chose you. He never says that. He says, well, you sold it to them, right? You hoodwinked them, you tricked them, you manipulated them. No. Human beings have sentience. We have the ability to understand and decipher the world around us. And we have the ability to make choices. We make those choices every day when we just kind of bend the knee to social media algorithms. And they made those choices every single day when they chose Dr. Doom, when they never rejected him, despite knowing his history, knowing what he was capable of, knowing the things that he had done. When he had come to them and he had said, I will make the world a better place. All you have to do is bend the knee to me. They chose to do that. No one had a gun to their heads. It's not like he conquered the world through force. And so it was one of these funny things, because it kind of, I think in a lot of ways illustrates the fact that superheroes oftentimes don't do what is probably the most important thing for a superhero to do. Hold the common man's feet to the fire and say, hey, we are here to help you. But understand, there are also consequences for your actions. Do not trick yourself into thinking that there are not. So I think it's a really interesting philosophical concept when it comes to how Reed operates as a hero versus villains and someone like Doom. And so what's cool here is that Doom says, no, I have realized the dreams of Sargon and of Alexander and Augustus and Osman in ways they never could. My only fault was to take over a world that had you and your ilk in it. I've learned that any plan for world liberation, and Reed corrects him, right, domination, and he says, liberation, the people chose me, right, is destined to fail unless the initial step of this plan is to destroy you self-proclaimed heroes first. Thus, I have not lost. I have merely postponed. So even in defeat, this guy just cannot admit it. Let it never be said that Dr. Doom's ego is the most powerful thing he has running. And where Reed initially thinks that he's here to like taunt him and just be like, and don't worry, Reed, like I have another scheme up my sleeve, that Doom says no, right? I did not come to discuss philosophy. I came to make a demand of you. And Reed just says the answer is no. And Doom says it was not a request. Richards, I am dying. And Reed just says, like, I will not save you, Victor, right? What you've done, I don't know how to forgive it. I will not save you, and I need you to understand that. Because Reed has done that over the years, right? Reed has been instrumental in saving Dr. Doom's life in a variety of different ways. A perfect example of this is during the encounter with the Beyonder in Secret Wars 2, which, coincidentally enough, is actually how John Byrne wrapped up the whole, like, continuity issue regarding how Dr. Doom could have feasibly been dead in Fantastic Four 259 and 260, and then suddenly appeared in Secret Wars. He was plucked out of time. But Reed Richards, right, in watching Dr. Doom about to be destroyed by the Beyonder, rationalized everything that was going on and finally understood why it is that despite Dr. Doom appearing in Secret Wars from 1984, that the Beyonder didn't know who he was, didn't recognize him, even though Dr. Doom had stolen the Beyonder's power, right? And so Reed essentially staved off death for Dr. Doom. And there have actually been instances where Reed Richards, quote unquote, restores the life of Dr. Doom. But again, it's like, I am not playing that game. And so that's why Doom simply counters, and he says, of course not, right? You are as incapable of saving Doom, Richards, as you are of defeating him. That is not what I demand. And so Reed just asked, then whatever you're asking, the answer is still no. You have some kind of a trick, some kind of a scheme. And Doom just says, I traded my life for hers, along with my titles and my planet and my soul. Is she well? And Reed just says yes, right? Like Valeria's fine. And he says, then it was worth it. And even Reed, almost as prideful as Dr. Doom, refuses to accept the fact that Doom would have acted so selflessly. He says, you wouldn't do it selflessly, right? You've got some kind of a plan. And Doom's just like, shut up. right? He's just like, silence. I will not spend my last moments here enduring your vain, facile, endlessly effete objections. But Richards, take good care of my world. And Doom disappears. He literally just vanishes in a puff of smoke. And what he does is on the inside of his helmet, he leaves an important document, right? It says, upon my death, a copy of this document shall be inscribed within every book, computer system, and information storage device on the planet. I, Victor Von Doom, being of sound mind and body, hereby appoint Reed Richards, son of Nathaniel and Evelyn Richards, to be the executor and trustee of this, the final will and testament of Victor Von Doom. I hereby revoke all former wills and codicils made by me, and hereby declare and demand that all that I possess, own, or rule, including my nation of Latveria, shall be bequeathed to whoever first manages to blank. We don't find out what it says, but whatever it is that it says, Reed is just like, holy shit. So here's what I want to know from you guys. What does it say? Like, what's that final part of the statement, right? What's the final part? What does a person have to achieve in order to take over everything that Dr. Doom left behind? With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Books of Doom was incredible. Like, Ryan North is probably one of the greatest Fantastic Four writers of all time. This has been an incredible run so far because it's still going. But yeah, let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button, and I will catch you all later. Peace.